Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Crime and Punishment Review and Recap series. This is our final episode for Crime and Punishment as we're looking at our final theme in the final time period, which is what changes and continuity there was in the punishment of offenders since 1900 to present day. In terms of change then, corporal punishments, so physical punishments, undergo a big change during this time period. In the early 1900s, birching, which is like a kind of a whipping with a birch stick, was used on petty criminals instead of prison because it was argued that it was cheaper than sending a criminal to jail. It was quicker, and some people argued it was a more effective deterrent. However, as attitudes begin to change on physical punishments and the punishment of offenders in general, it's banned for young offenders in 1933, it's banned for adults in 1948, and it's then banned for all prisoners, including those that have broken rules in jails in 1962. So this is a really significant change because in every time period that we've looked at prior to 1900, there has been some sort of physical punishment used on criminals and offenders. Another very significant change during this time period is to do with capital punishments, so executions. In 1908, executions are banned for children under the age of 16. And then in 1965, you get the abolition of the Death Penalty Act, which basically says that all crimes are no longer punishable by death, except for treason and murder, and then murders are removed from this list in 1969. Technically, up until 2004, when it's fully removed from the books, somebody could be executed for treason, but they are not, okay? So when we talk about the abolition of the death penalty, we talk about it in 1965 and 1969 for murders. Just because we have got rid of the death penalty, though, it doesn't mean that people aren't calling for it to return. And often people who argue that it should return argue that the death penalty is an effective deterrent against very serious crimes. Some people argue that it forms some sort of retribution or revenge or closure, perhaps for a victim's family of a murder victim, if that offender is then executed. And some will argue that it's rare for them to make mistakes over whether somebody is guilty or not. However, just like there are arguments for the return of the death penalty, there are also arguments against it. For example, most murders are not planned. They are normally done in the heat of a moment. Therefore, people will argue that it's not an effective deterrent because people were not thinking about it at the time. Technically, it is the state, the government, authorising the killing of one of its citizens through an execution. And there are cases of mistrials and misjustices where the wrong person is found guilty of a crime. And of course, if you execute them, you can't take that back, okay? So capital punishment is another very significant change during this time period, because in every time period, like with corporal punishment, we have talked about methods of execution of offenders. Prisons as well go through huge changes during this time period. We'd seen how in the industrial period prisons had begun to change and the ball had begun to start rolling with reform, but it's during this time that it really takes off. Rehabilitation, so trying to make criminals better people by educating them and teaching them the error of their ways, is popularized during this time period. And that's thanks to psychologists who study how we can get offenders to not recommit crimes when they leave jail. And they argue that we should be focusing on re-educating and training our criminals in jail. In 1902, you get Borstals, which are introduced. Now, these are for under 21, so at that time, that would be considered people who are not adults. And it's here that they're educated and trained. In 1988, Borstals are replaced with young offenders institutions for criminals aged between sort of 18 to 20. And the reason for this is if you put young people, particularly children under the age of 18, under 20, in jails with hardened adult criminals, you are promoting what is called the criminal class, the idea that these young offenders will then be influenced by those sort of around them. You also get a prison reformer just in this time period, just as there was in the previous time period. However, during the 1900s, it's a man called Alexander Patterson, and from 1922 onwards, he pushes lots of change in prison. For example, he urges the relaxation of the silence system that we saw in the industrial period. He argues that we should not be shaving the heads of offenders, that we should be giving offenders education, and on top of that, meaningful work that is paid with a small amount. Because if you encourage that and give offenders the skills they need to function properly in society when they leave jail, they will be less likely to re-offend again. However, despite the fact that we get many positive changes with prisons during this time, there are still many problems with modern prisons. During this time, the prison population has risen massively, and that's for lots of different reasons. The fact that we now see criminals getting shorter sentences on a more frequent basis, so it means there's a constant turnover of people in prison, and the fact that many trials are being delayed by large amounts, which means those on trial are having to wait in prison. It's meant that the population of prisons has shot up, which leads, of course, to overcrowding. And there is none more so an example of overcrowding prisons than the 1990 Strangeway prison riot, which led to 2 deaths when prisoners rioted and they took control of the prison. And this was a huge embarrassment for the government because it showed them and the country as a whole that we were not in control of our prison system. So it sort of epitomised those modern problems with prisons. Nowadays, we get many more private firms running prisons as a way of cutting costs for the government because they're very expensive. However, this also comes with its own problems because they are private companies at the end of the day. So because we still have lots of problems with prisons, there are now many alternatives to prison, which again is another example of how punishment has changed since the start of the 1900s. So in 1907 you get the probation service, which is for minor offenders where they can avoid jail, so they'll normally get a suspended sentence to avoid the problem of overcrowding. In 1967 we get another development with the introduction of the parole system, where offenders who had demonstrated good behaviour in prison might be released slightly early before the end of their sentence. In 1990, you get digital tagging, which is used. So this is the electronic ankle tags that you might have seen on the news, where we can know the location of offenders at all times of the day to make sure that they're doing as they should be. And in 1972, you get what is known as community service, which is unpaid work, normally for minor offences. And the idea behind that is it gives back to the community, it rights the wrong of the crime, and again, it avoids a jail sentence. You also get increased support for victims. So we've talked often throughout each of the time periods about how punishment is focused on the offenders, but it's during this time period that we increasingly start to look at how we should be treating victims of crime as well. And there has been much support for victims over the last 120 years. The Victims Charter sets out victims' rights, and you also get what is known as the victim's personal statement, which is where the victim of a crime can read a short statement that they have written to the person who is found guilty in court to let them know how it is impacted in their lives as a result of being a victim of crime. However, some victims are still not receiving the support that they need, whether this is through to sort of incompetence, whether it's through to a lack of funding, or the difficulties in reaching out to those who are victims of crime. But overall, there are huge, significant changes to the punishment of offenders during this time period. Lots of the punishments that we've talked about in previous time periods either completely change or disappear entirely. So that just about wraps up our Crime and Punishment Review and Recap series. I hope you found these videos useful. There are, of course, videos for the Elizabethan period, and we will also be putting up videos for the Nazi Germany period as well. So please do keep an eye out on the channel for those.